When my wife and I bought our first house, an old Victorian style built in the 50s, almost every night we heard what sounded like kids' footsteps running down the upstairs hallway and other random sounds. My wife mentioned it to one of the neighbors, and they said it was probably just peacocks on the roof. The house backed up to a conservation area where wild peacocks lived, and they would occasionally get up on the rooftops. That answer made sense, so we basically got used to it and eventually ignored it. Less than a year later, our son was born, and when he was 1, he would balance all of his toys on top of the other toys and make them spin. Literally found the center of balance of various toys and would walk in circles around the room, giving each a gentle touch to keep it rotating. It was the weirdest and coolest thing I'd ever seen. When he was 2 or 3, we would hear him talking in his room at night. One night I asked who he was talking to. He said, "Tracy." I asked, "Who's Tracy?" And he says, "The girl who lives in the wall. She's usually nice, but sometimes she scares me." He described a girl with brown hair and a yellow dress who would play with him sometimes and occasionally wake him up at night, but he didn't seem to be bothered by any of it, just startled sometimes. He would talk about her once in a while, but it wasn't a common occurrence. A couple of years later, we had added on to the house and moved the master bedroom downstairs, switching the kids' rooms around. Our youngest was now in his old room and about ready to transition from crib to toddler bed. She'd always been a sound sleeper, but she cried almost every night in that room. Her first night in the toddler bed, we heard a loud thud, followed by screaming, and rushed into the room. We were thinking she had fallen out of bed, but she was on the other side of the room. We got her calmed down and back into bed, and it happened again the next night. So we ended up switching the kids' rooms back, and they were fine. We looked up the history of the house, but we didn't find anything about missing little girls or anyone with the name Tracy that had lived there. Eventually, our son stopped talking about her, and a few years later, I ended up taking a job with another company, and we moved. The house was empty for a few months after we moved, and the neighbor across the street called my wife one day. About a week after we left, she thought she saw our daughter looking out the window, so she waved at her, and then she remembered we didn't live there anymore. I lived in Japan in my early 20s. I got pregnant and was moved on base. My husband was in the Navy. It was so I could be closer to medical. Nothing happened in my house until my daughter was born a few months later. She was an infant, but old enough where I would let her cry for a few minutes in the middle of the night to see if she would soothe herself to sleep. Listening to the baby monitor, I heard a very gentle shh. I rushed into her room, and I saw a peaceful baby, and the rocking chair was swaying. Living in Japan, there were mild earthquakes several times a week. I used my rational brain and decided that I'd heard nothing, and an earthquake had caused the rocking chair to move. Over the next few weeks, weirder and weirder things started to happen. My husband was deployed, and I was the only adult at home. When I made tea, I filled barely half of the kettle because it was just me. A couple of days after the shh incident, I went to make some tea, and the kettle was so full the moment I moved it, water sloshed everywhere. It was impossible to have filled it that full. I know I didn't do it. The next night I heard the shh again. I said, "Thank you," out loud. I heard the cabinets open and close. I got up, walked towards the kitchen to get some water, and the cabinets opened again, slowly, then closed. 2 nights later, all of the battery-operated toys turned on at about 1 a.m. All of them. A cacophony of electronic noise. After about 2 minutes, they all stopped. Again, I said, "Thank you," but only because I didn't know what the heck was happening. A few days later, I was sewing and dropped a needle on the carpet. I looked and I couldn't find it. My baby was just starting to crawl, and I was frantic to find it. I couldn't. I searched for a few hours and finally gave up. An hour later, I found a sheet of paper on my kitchen counter with the needle exactly in the center of the piece of paper. It was the craziest thing. I was never afraid. It always seemed loving to me. I mean, honestly, I was terrified until the needle incident. Then it seemed to me like I had a friend trying to help with the baby. Once I reached that perspective, the earlier events were no longer scary. The situation repeated about 3 or 4 times, and I was grateful for it at the time. My husband came home, and that night the energy in the house just seemed different. Not off, but different. We went a couple of days with this, and it was unsettling. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to get some water, and I saw an old woman sitting on my couch. I was too startled to be afraid, but got myself together and said, "Thank you for your help. My husband is home now." I then walked into the kitchen. When I walked back through, she was gone. No other crazy things happened again until my daughter's first birthday. We had a party early in the day and left balloons in the living room. I went into my daughter's room in the middle of the night to check on her, and it was filled with all of the balloons from the living room. Nothing else happened after that.